Chapter 14, Brain and Cranial Nerves. Your brain structure. Your brain is involved with thinking, learning, and memory. It contains tens of thousands of neurons and weighs about 3 pounds. It contains approximately 98% of all of the body's neural tissues. Now, it is divided up into different structures. The cerebrum is the largest part of the human brain. It is composed of 2 cerebral hemispheres, and these are covered with the cerebral cortex, which is going to be gray matter. That is the outer surface of the brain. This is made up of gyri and sulci. The gyri are the elevated regions, and then the sulci are depressions. And this is going to increase the surface area of the cortex. You'll also find in the cortex some fissures, which are very large sulci. The second part of the brain is the cerebellum. This is also known as the little brain. This is the second largest part. It is towards the posterior of the brain, below the cerebrum, and it is covered with a cerebellar cortex. And this cortex has folia, which look like wrinkles. The third part is the Diencephalon. Now that is the name of the embryonic part of the brain. This is going to be found between the 2 cerebral hemispheres and links them together. And it's going to be made up of the epithalamus, thalamus, and the hypothalamus. Fourth part is the brainstem. Now this is the bottom of the brain. This is going to connect to the spinal cord, and it's made up of 3 parts. At the top of the brainstem, right below the diencephalon, is the midbrain, also called the mesencephalon, the embryonic name. Below that is the pons, and then below that is the medulla oblongata, which connects directly with the spinal cord. Now, the way your brain is set up, your medulla and pons are very primitive structures that most organisms have. And then as you build up to having a cerebrum, you don't find that in every organism. And it gets larger as we get more intelligent. So you're going to find in your medulla and pons a lot of primitive survival responses compared to the cerebrum, which is involved with thinking and learning. This figure shows the various major parts of the human brain with a list of generalized functions of each of them. Within the brain, we find a number of ventricles. These are chambers that are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. They are lined by ependymal cells. Those are a type of neuroglial cells from the CNS that were involved with processing, producing, circulating, monitoring your cerebrospinal fluid. So they line the ventricles and pump out the cerebrospinal fluid. There are 4 ventricles. There are 2 lateral ventricles, 1 in each of the cerebral hemispheres. They will come together and process and pass the fluid to the 3rd ventricle. The 3rd ventricle is located in the diencephalon and is connected to the lateral ventricles by the interventricular foramen. The 4th ventricle is going to be found down in the medulla oblongata, and this will be connected to the 3rd ventricle by the cerebral aqueduct. So we're going to have fluid moving from the 1st and 2nd ventricles down to the 3rd, down to the 4th ventricle. At the base of the 4th ventricle, it will narrow down and becomes continuous with the central canal of the spinal cord, which is also filled with cerebrospinal fluid. So the cerebrospinal fluid will move into the spinal cord and then circulate back into the subarachnoid space and then be reabsorbed back into the blood system. Protection of your brain is crucial. We do not have neurons that can reproduce, so if there's damage to the brain, those neurons and your abilities will be lost. There are 4 different layers of protection. The first is the cranial bones. These are going to be your occipital, your frontal bone, your parietals, temporals, ethmoid, and sphenoid bone that all form the cranium, which provides an area for the brain to sit surrounded by the bony structure. The second level of protection is provided by the cranial meninges. These are membranes that are continuous with the spinal meninges. There are 3 different layers of the cranial meninges, starting with the outermost, which is called the dura mater. It is a very tough, durable connective tissue. This is going to be fused to the periosteum of the cranial bones to help provide protection and stabilize the position of the brain. The middle layer is called the arachnoid matter, and then the inner layer is the pia matter, which is going to be stuck directly to the surface of the brain. The third level of protection is the cerebrospinal fluid. This is going to function to cushion and support the brain to transport nutrients, hormones, and waste products away from the brain. And the final layer is the blood-brain barrier. This is the capillaries surrounded by the astrocytes, another type of neuroglial cell, and they surround them with their cellular processes and then regulate what can leave the blood in the brain area. So not everything gets to get out, so we can regulate the interstitial fluid around the neurons and keep them safe. Now your cranial meninges, again, are continuous with the spinal meninges. These are the membranes that surround the brain and the spinal cord to help protect it. The outermost dura matter is tough connective tissue. It's fused to the periosteum of the cranial bones. It is going to be very durable. Then you have the arachnoid matter, the middle layer. This will form a layer that then has a space underneath it called the subarachnoid space. And in this space you're going to find trabecula, which are membranous struts from the arachnoid membrane that cross the subarachnoid space and extend to the inner membrane, the pia mater. And this subarachnoid space will be filled with cerebrospinal fluid and acts as a shock absorber for the brain itself. And the final layer is the pia mater, the innermost. This will strongly adhere to the surface of the brain. It's anchored to the brain by astrocytes and is stuck there, and also will hold capillaries right onto the brain so that there's plenty of nutrients and oxygen for the neurons. Trying to remember this in order, DAP, D-A-P, so you remember the order in which they go from external to internal. The dura mater, that outermost layer of the meninges, is again tough and connective tissue. It's fused to the periosteum of the cranial bone, but it also has folds that extend deeper into the crevices that are found within the brain. These folds are called dural folds. This is the inner layer of the dura mater because it consists of two layers, and they're going to contour to the brain to help stabilize and support the brain even further. There are three different dural folds. The falx cerebri is the fold that occurs between the two cerebral hemispheres. Now the two hemispheres are separated by the longitudinal fissure. This is a pretty deep fissure, so the falx cerebri fold will go in and down to the fissure and then back up the other side, so it kind of holds the two sides of the hemispheres together. The second fold is the tentorium cerebelli. This is going to be a fold that goes in the crack between the cerebrum and the cerebellum, which is right below the cerebrum. And then the third folds will be called the falx cerebelli, and these are going to fold between the cerebellar hemispheres. Again, the purpose of this is to help stick all the parts of the brain together so that they are held solidly together and don't get banged around and bruised. The function of the cerebrospinal fluid is going to help to cushion and support the brain. It decreases the weight of the brain considerably when it's floating in the cerebrospinal fluid, so it's easier for you to hold your head up. It also cushions it from blows, so there's a nice watery layer around and within the brain to protect it. It's also going to transport nutrients, hormones, and waste products. Your cerebrospinal fluid is going to be formed by the choroid plexus. Now, choroid plexus is a combination of specialized ependymal cells that surround the capillaries. So these are going to surround the capillaries and make it so that they control what can leave the capillaries. So not everything gets out, only certain parts of the fluid and nutrients and oxygen get out, and then they can pick up the waste and carbon dioxide. You make about there's approximately 500 milliliters per day produced of the cerebrospinal fluid. Only 150 mLs of cerebrospinal fluid will be within the system of all those ventricles at one time. So we replace it and renew it about every 8 hours, which keeps it very clean. So your rate of removal is equal to about the rate of production. And each of your ventricles will have its own choroid plexus associated with it, pumping out the cerebrospinal fluid. Remember that your cerebrospinal fluid, also known as CSF, will circulate from one ventricle to the next, and then down the central canal of the spinal cord, and then back up to that subarachnoid space where it will be reabsorbed. Arachnoid granulations are these finger-like extensions of the arachnoid membrane that are on top of the arachnoid membrane, and they will have the CSF be reabsorbed from the arachnoid granulation into the venous circulation, the veins of the body, and then the fluid can be recirculated around and put back into the blood, and then cleaned up, got rid of the garbage, and then can be reused. The last layer of protection was the blood-brain barrier. With the capillaries surrounded by astrocytes, they have little cellular processes off the astrocytes, so they wrap the capillaries, and now they regulate what can leave the capillaries up in the brain. So they're controlling all the interstitial fluid that's going to surround the neurons. They're going to release chemicals that control the permeability of the endothelium, that's the tissue of the capillaries, to various substances. So some things can leave the capillaries, others can't. And this controls the fluid so that it protects the neurons. If the astrocytes are damaged, the blood-brain barrier will disappear and you'll lose control of that interstitial environment. And now the neurons are exposed to a large number of things they shouldn't be. At the structure of the brain, we're going to start with the brainstem, which is the lower part of the brain, the more primitive part of the brain. The brainstem is going to connect the brain, what you think of as your brain, your cerebrum, and to the spinal cord. The brainstem is going to be made up of the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. All parts of the brain, whether it's the brainstem or the cerebrum, will be made up of both white and gray matter. The white matter will be internal, the gray matter will be external, except for we'll have clusters of gray matter buried internally in the cerebrum and various parts of the brain. Now the white matter is going to contain tracts carrying sensory information. They're either up to the higher reaches of the brain, that's where sensory information is, so it's going to come in from the peripheral to the spinal cord and then up, and those are called ascending tracts, and then it will be processed as to what to do, and then it will send information back down, which will be motor information, which will eventually go back down from the higher reaches of the brain to the brainstem and then out to the peripheral nervous system, and those are called descending tracts. The gray matter itself will either form the external area of, say, the cerebrum and the cerebellum, as well as make up groups of cell bodies called nuclei buried internally within the different parts of the brain. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. These arise from the brain stem and then will go out to the periphery, and they will control things that are up located near in the head region. Different senses, smell, hearing, taste, as well as eye movement and swallowing. We're going to go over the different parts of the brain, starting with the medulla, which is right above the top of the spinal cord, and moving upward to the higher reaches of the brain. And in each part we will talk about both gray matter, which is made up of your cell bodies, and white matter, which will be made up of your neuron axons that are myelinated. Starting with the medulla oblongata, the gray matter provides the cranial nerves 8 through 12. They come from this area. And then the autonomic nuclei of the medulla control various visceral activities. Now remember, your medulla is going to be more primitive because it's going to control things that keep you alive. So in the autonomic nuclei we have two sets. We have the cardiovascular center, which has two subsets. There's the cardiac center, which adjusts the heart rate and the strength of contraction. And there's a vasomotor center, which adjusts the flow of blood through the tissues. The second autonomic nuclei is the respiratory rhythmicity center. It is going to set the pace of respiration. Both of these things, blood flow and respiration, are crucial to your survival. You will also find within the medulla, starting in the medulla, and it will move up to higher reaches, the reticular formation. This will go from the medulla up to the midbrain and then up into the cerebrum, and it will maintain alertness of the brain. We also have a number of relay stations for sending incoming information up to higher areas of the brain. The white matter is going to be composed mainly of ascending and descending tracts. That's going to be the case with most of the parts of the brain. The white matter ascending tracts will bring sensory information in. It'll go to the medulla and it'll decide what should go higher up, so it'll send it up to the pons and further up. The descending tracts will then be bringing the information back down from the higher reaches and down through the medulla, and then it will send it out to the spinal cord. Right above the medulla oblongata is the pons. The term pons means bridge, and it is going to be involved with connecting all the higher and lower brain centers together. It's going to connect the cerebellum to the rest of the brain, so it's basically a processing center to send information further up or bring it back down to the brain stem. Now your pons has gray matter, and it gives rise to the cranial nerves 5 through 7. It has a number of different relay centers here where they're going to send information that's coming in, that's sensory based, to the cerebellum, and then motor information from the cerebellum back out. It will also have some reflex centers. There are 2 reflex centers, both involved with respiration. They are called the aponeuristic and the pneumotaxic centers. These are both going to be involved with controlling the rate and depth of respiration, and they're going to act to modify the activity of the respiratory rhythmicity center of the medulla. The white matter is going to again be made up of ascending and descending tracts. Ascending will bring in the sensory from the medulla and send it up to the thalamus. The descending will bring motor information from the cerebrum or cerebellum and send it from those areas to the spinal and cranial nerves. Above the pons is the midbrain, also known as the mesencephalon. The gray matter here gives rise to cranial nerves 3 and 4, and you'll also find in the gray matter structures called corpora quadrigemina. These corpora quadrigemina means body of 4, and this is made up of 4 different little structures. There are 2 superior colliculi and 2 inferior colliculi, and they're going to be involved with reflex responses. Your superior colliculi is going to initiate a reflex response to a visual stimuli, such as if somebody throws a ball at your face, you blink and you try to get away from it. Okay? That blinking is a response to visual stimuli. Your inferior colliculi will initiate a reflex response to auditory stimuli. So if somebody walks in the room and slams the door, you turn to look and see who it is or what's going on. Both of these things are for survival, so that you can evaluate if this new incoming information is a threat to you at all. Also found in the gray matter of the midbrain is the reticular formation. This is continuing up from the medulla, the pons, and this will contain the reticular activating system, which will spread out throughout the cerebrum and will trigger alertness. The white matter, again, is going to be ascending and descending tracts. Your ascending tracts are still taking sensory up to the thalamus, which is up in the diencephalon, and your descending tracts are going to be taking voluntary somatic motor information to the cerebellum. This is going to be via the pons, so it has to be carried down to the pons, and then the pons sends it over to the cerebellum, or it will carry the information down to the spinal cord. The diencephalon, again another embryonic name, is going to be right above the midbrain, and it is going to connect the 2 hemispheres of the cerebrum. The diencephalon is made up of 3 parts: the epithalamus, the thalamus, and then we'll talk about the hypothalamus. Now you want to think of this sort of as a structure sort of like a house, where the walls of the house are the thalamus, the floor is the hypothalamus, the roof is the epithalamus. Part of the epithalamus is the pineal gland. This could be like a little weak chimney hanging off it. The pineal gland is going to produce melatonin, which is going to regulate your day-night cycles. Also located up in the epithalamus is the choroid plexus for the third ventricle, which is going to produce the cerebrospinal fluid for that ventricle. Now the thalamus, its job is basically as a bouncer. It's going to filter the sensory information that has come up from the medulla and the pons all the way up to the thalamus in hopes of getting to the cerebrum. But the thalamus isn't going to let it through. It allows only a small amount, about 1% of the incoming information, to reach the cerebrum. The rest of it is turned away by the thalamus, and then the lower parts of the brain have to deal with it and analyze it and determine what should be done. The thalamus also works as a relay center. Okay, it's going to relay information to the cerebral cortex, to the cerebrum. It's also going to connect the hypothalamus to the frontal cortex of the cerebrum. That's going to be used for processing emotional state. And it will house part of the limbic system, which is your emotional brain, will be found within the thalamus. The hypothalamus, the bottom part of the diencephalon, has a number of different important functions. It's going to control the autonomic centers of the medulla and the pons. Remember, those controlled your heart rate, your blood pressure, respiration, as well as some digestive activity. It's going to control autonomic and voluntary functions throughout the body. It's going to release hormones that control the pituitary. Now, the pituitary is part of the endocrine system. Hypothalamus is part of the nervous system. So this is an interface between these two systems so they can work together. When you first get stimulated, your nervous system will take over its response, but it's a quick, short response. To keep the response going, we have to bring the endocrine system on board. And that would be the function of the hypothalamus, to tell the endocrine system they have to get involved in that. It will also produce a number of its own hormones. It produces antidiuretic hormone, which is going to be involved with water retention, which means that you don't urinate as much, you conserve the water. You're going to produce this when you've been, say, in a bad accident, there's a lot of bleeding. You're going to start producing antidiuretic hormones so you don't lose any more fluid than you need to. It produces oxytocin, which controls smooth muscle contractions, necessary for the birthing process as well as ejaculation in men. The hypothalamus controls your body temperature and your circadian rhythms, which are your day-night cycles that occur on a 24-hour period. It also has the mammillary bodies, which control feeding reflexes. So the hypothalamus has a number of diverse jobs and is extremely important. The cerebellum is posterior to the brainstem and just below the cerebrum. This is the second largest part of the brain. It's also referred to as the little brain. It has two hemispheres that will be held together by the vermis, which is in the middle of it, to hold those hemispheres together and allow them to communicate. The function of the cerebellum is to maintain balance and equilibrium, and also refines learned motor patterns, such as riding a bike, will be stored in the cerebellum. The cerebellum is made up of two hemispheres. These hemispheres will have both gray matter and white matter in them, just like all the rest of the parts of the brain. The gray matter will form the cerebellar cortex, which is the outer layer of the cerebellum, and cerebellar nuclei, which are clusters of cell bodies. The nuclei are going to function to provide involuntary coordination of ongoing body movements. So you aren't always in control of your body movements. Some are involuntary, and controlling these is the function of the cerebellum. It is also going to monitor all kinds of incoming information, such as from your proprioceptors, which are those stretch receptors, vision, tactile, balance, auditory sensations, and with this incoming information, it's going to act to adjust your posture of the body and to help program and fine-tune movements that are controlled at conscious and subconscious levels. So mainly your cerebellum is controlling movement. Okay. Your white matter is going to make up the inside of the cerebellum. It's going to be found in the arbor vitae, and this looks like a little pattern tree, and this is going to connect the cortex and the nuclei of the cerebellum to the cerebellar peduncles, which is a fancy name for white tracts. And those cerebellar peduncles will then link the cerebellum to other parts of the brain. Now for the cerebrum. The cerebrum is what we think of as the thinking brain. This is where we're going to process intellectual processes, emotional processing. We're going to remember things. We're going to localize and interpret that sensory information, control our voluntary skeletal muscle activity. The cerebrum has got two hemispheres, just like the cerebellum. They are separated by that longitudinal fissure, which is a deep fissure that goes all the way down to the Diencephalon area. Okay. The cerebrum will be broken up into 5 different lobes. Externally, we have the frontal lobe right below the frontal bone, the parietal lobe underneath the parietal bones, occipital in the back under the occipital bone, and the temporal on either side underneath the temporal bones. We then have one internal lobe called the insula, which will be found just below or between the temporal and the frontal lobe, deep inside the tissue. The cortex is going to be covered with gray matter, and it is going to have gyri, which are raised areas, and sulci, which is grooves. Now this irregular pattern on the cortex is going to increase the surface area of the cortex so we can have more neurons. And this is the area that does most of the processing for thinking. Now we have some larger sulci, besides just the little ones that are on the cortex, and those larger sulcis will form separations between the different lobes. The central sulcus will separate the parietal and frontal lobe. The lateral sulcus will separate temporal and parietal lobes. And the parieto-occipital sulcus will separate the parietal from the occipital lobe. In this mid-sagittal section, we're showing only one of the hemispheres, and you see how it stays nice and grooved with the sulci and gyri down until right above the cingulate gyrus. The strip of tissue right below that, called the corpus callosum, is what will connect the two hemispheres and allow the two hemispheres to talk to each other. Okay. If you look at the central sulci, on either side we have a precentral and a postcentral gyrus, and these areas will have specialized functions. Gray matter of the cerebrum consists of the basal nuclei, which are clusters of cell bodies within the inner tissue, and these control your muscle tone and learned motor patterns, as well as the cerebral cortex, the outer layer of the cerebrum. Within the cerebral cortex, you're going to find the primary motor cortex, which is located in the precentral gyri of the frontal lobe, and this is involved with voluntary control of your skeletal muscles. You have the primary somatosensory cortex, which is located in the postcentral gyri of the parietal lobe, and this is going to have somatic sensory information, the perception of this sensory information coming from your skin and your joints. We also have the visual cortex, which is for sight, located in the occipital lobe, the auditory cortex for hearing in the temporal lobe, olfactory cortex, which is smell, in the medial side of the temporal lobe, the gustatory cortex for taste in the insula, and then we have a number of association areas which are going to integrate sensory and motor information, and integrative centers which are going to direct your response, your motor or analytical functions. They're going to collect input from all those association areas and then initiate a response. The white matter of the cerebrum is made up of 3 different sets of fibers, and they're distinguished by who they talk to. The association fibers are going to connect the neural cortex, the cerebrum, within the same hemisphere. So the neurons from one hemisphere can talk to each other. The commissural fibers are going to connect the cortex between the two different hemispheres, so the right and left hemisphere can speak. Majority of these are found in that corpus callosum, that connecting tissue that allows the two sides to communicate. And then we have projection fibers, which are going to pass down from the diencephalon to lower brain centers or to the spinal cord to pass down the information coming from the cerebrum. There are a number of different integrative centers, but we're going to talk about 3 of them right now that are prominent. You have your Wernicke's area. This is going to give meaning to visual and auditory cues. So if I hold the banana up and said, "What is this?" your brain recognizes it, gives meaning to that, and now knows in your brain that it's a banana. Or if I said, "Jump," your brain would know what that meant to do. Your Broca's area is your speech center. This is going to coordinate your motor control of your tongue to form speech and be able to produce it. Your Wernicke's and your Broca's area are going to work together so that you can actually speak properly. You have to have both of them functioning well, so that I can hold up the banana and you recognize it with your Wernicke's area, and then you can form the word banana with your Broca's area. The third integrative center is in your prefrontal cortex, which is the very front of the frontal cortex. And this is going to carry out prediction and estimation and the related emotions like anxiety that occur with those situations. Your prefrontal cortex does not fully develop till you're about 25 years of age, which explains why teenagers don't always have the ability to predict what might happen if they jump off the roof and that they might break their leg, or estimate, "Oh, that car's traveling pretty fast, so I better not pull out in front of it." The two hemispheres of the cerebrum also have different jobs and different functions. This concept is called hemispheric lateralization. And the left hemisphere is more involved with language, math, and logic, whereas the right hemisphere is more involved with sensory, emotions, and spatial visualization, like 3D concepts. The limbic system is considered your emotional brain. This is going to include nuclei and tracts along the border of the cerebrum and the diencephalon. It's considered a functional group, not an anatomical group, because all the parts are not closely related in space, but they have similar functions. The functions of the limbic system are to establish your emotional state, to link your conscious, intelligent functions of the cerebrum to autonomic functions of the brainstem, and it also will help facilitate memory, storage, and retrieval of the memories. But this is in the lower reaches of the below the cerebrum. So sometimes your emotional brain does not really listen to your intelligent brain. There are a number of components of the limbic system. The amygdala, also referred to as the amygdaloid bodies, interface between the limbic system, the cerebrum, and your sensory systems. They're also going to be involved in your fight or flight response, which is an autonomic reaction to initiate a fear response, and this will also link your emotions with memory. Your hippocampus, the second part of the limbic system, is involved with your storage and retrieval of long-term memories. The cingulate gyrus is involved with expressing emotions through gestures. So if you wave your hands around a lot when you're upset, that would be your cingulate gyrus that would be involved in that. It also is going to help resolve mental conflicts when you're frustrated. The fornix is a tract of white matter that connects the hippocampus to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus will have centers within it that are responsible for the emotions of rage, fear, pain, and pleasure, sexual arousal. This last figure shows the human brain with the 12 pairs of cranial nerves and the names listed on the side, or the number of the nerve listed on the side.